On the afternoon of February 6, 1982, a routine family errand in Concord, California turned into every parent's nightmare. 2-year-old Tara Burke vanished from a parking lot in broad daylight while her parents were briefly inside a store. What began as an ordinary Saturday outing quickly became one of the most haunting missing child cases in California history. For 10 months, police searched. Her family waited. The community prayed. But there was no trace of the little girl with light brown hair and brown eyes. And then, in December of that same year, something remarkable happened. An 11-year-old boy walked into a police station with information that would bring Tara home. This is the story of Tara Burke, the detective who refused to give up, and the boy who saved her life. Before we begin, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from, and subscribe to Seek Stories for more true crime cases with incredible outcomes. Concord, California in the early 80s was the kind of place where people felt safe. It was suburban, quiet, about 30 miles northeast of San Francisco. The kind of town where kids rode bikes without helmets and parents didn't lock their doors at night. Not because crime didn't exist, but because it felt distant, like something that happened in big cities to other people. The Burke family lived in nearby West Pittsburgh. Steve and Elizabeth had 2 children. Jeremy was 9, responsible for his age, the kind of kid who took his role as big brother seriously. And then there was Tara. She was 2 years old, about to turn 3 in a few weeks. Light brown hair that caught the sun, curious brown eyes, that toddler energy that never seems to run out. She was at that magical age where everything is new, where the world is full of wonder. February 6, 1982 started like any other Saturday. The Burkes needed to exchange a part for their van. Nothing exciting, just one of those weekend errands that fills up your day. They drove to an auto parts store on Clayton Road, a busy strip with a big parking lot, cars coming and going, people everywhere. It was around 4 in the afternoon. Sunny, mild weather for February. Elizabeth pulled into a spot close to the storefront. She could see the car from inside the shop. Steve got out first to handle the exchange. Then Elizabeth followed. Jeremy and Tara stayed in the van. Now, before we judge that decision, remember this was 1982. There were no Amber Alerts. No faces of missing children on milk cartons yet. No constant news cycle reminding parents of every danger. This was just what people did. You left your kids in the car for a few minutes. You ran in, you ran out. It was normal. Elizabeth locked the doors. She told Jeremy to watch his sister. The boy nodded. Tara was strapped in her car seat, playing with a stuffed toy. Everything was fine. And then someone knocked on the window. Jeremy looked up. A man stood outside the van, smiling. He was young, maybe early 20s, slim build, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. The man gestured toward the store and said through the glass, "Your mom wants you both to come inside." Jeremy hesitated. That was weird, right? His mom hadn't said anything about coming inside. But the man seemed nice. He had that friendly, casual tone that adults use when they're being helpful. And Jeremy was 9. He wanted to be obedient. He wanted to do the right thing. So he unlocked the door. The moment that sliding door opened, everything changed. The man lunged forward, reaching straight for Tara. Before Jeremy could process what was happening, the stranger had unbuckled his little sister from her car seat and scooped her up. Tara let out a surprised cry. Jeremy shouted, "Hey!" and grabbed at his sister's legs. But the man was already backing away. And then he ran. He sprinted across that parking lot with Tara pressed against his chest, her little arms flailing. Jeremy scrambled out of the van, chasing after them, screaming for help. Within seconds, the man and Tara disappeared between 2 buildings at the edge of the lot. Several people saw pieces of what happened. A woman loading groceries noticed a man running with a child. Another witness saw someone disappear toward the apartment buildings nearby. But it happened so fast. And in that confused moment, nobody understood what they were seeing. Not until it was too late. When Steve and Elizabeth walked out of that store a few minutes later, they found Jeremy crying, the van door wide open, and Tara's empty car seat. Elizabeth screamed her daughter's name, running between cars, looking everywhere, anywhere. Steve followed, his mind racing, trying to understand. Where was she? Where was his baby girl? Within minutes, they knew. Someone had taken her. The police were called at 4:35. Concord officers arrived fast, lights flashing, sirens wailing. They treated it as an abduction from the start. Yellow tape went up. Witnesses were separated. Officers fanned out, searching dumpsters, checking cars, scouring every inch of that parking lot and the surrounding area. Jeremy, shaking and pale, did his best to describe the man. Young, white, dark jacket, baseball cap, nice voice. That detail, nice voice, would haunt the boy for years. A description went out immediately. White male, 20s, dark clothing, last seen carrying a small child. Roadblocks went up. Helicopters took to the air. Within an hour, the story was on every local news station. But Tara was already gone, and nobody knew where. That night, as darkness fell over Concord, Elizabeth Burke stood in her driveway surrounded by news cameras. Her voice broke as she spoke. "Please," she said, clutching Tara's blanket. "Please bring her home. She's all we have. We love her so much." The footage aired on every channel. People across the Bay Area saw that mother's anguish. They saw Tara's photo, that sweet face smiling at the camera. And they wondered, like everyone wonders in these moments, how does someone just disappear? The case landed on the desk of Sergeant Richard Gordy. He was 34, a veteran of the Concord Police Department, spent most of his career in the Juvenile Bureau. He'd worked runaway cases, custody disputes, even a few abuse investigations. But this was different. A 2-year-old doesn't run away. A 2-year-old can't plan an escape or hide herself. If Tara was out there, it was because an adult had taken her. And that thought made Gordy's blood run cold. He was off duty when the call came in, getting ready for a weekend barbecue. But the moment he heard the details, he dropped everything. By 5 o'clock, he was at the scene, badge around his neck, notepad in hand. The first thing Gordy did was talk to Jeremy. The boy was sitting in the back of a police car, tears streaming down his face. Gordy knelt down to his level, spoke softly. "You didn't do anything wrong," he told the boy. "This is not your fault." But Jeremy blamed himself. You could see it in his eyes. He was the big brother. He was supposed to protect her. Gordy got the description. Young male, dark jacket, baseball cap. The man had said, "Your mom wants you inside." It was a lie, of course. A calculated lie designed to trick a child into opening that door. And it had worked. Within hours, the investigation exploded. The FBI was notified. The California Department of Justice sent specialists. Concord officers worked around the clock. Flyers with Tara's photo were printed by the hundreds and plastered everywhere. Gas stations, grocery stores, bus stops. Every telephone pole in town had her face on it. Missing child. Have you seen Tara Burke? The community rallied. Volunteers showed up by the dozens, wanting to help search. They formed lines and walked through fields, calling Tara's name into the cold February air. Search dogs were brought in. Helicopters circled overhead with infrared cameras. Every abandoned building within a 5-mile radius was checked. But they found nothing. Not a piece of clothing. Not a strand of hair. Not a single trace that Tara had ever been there. The leads came in constantly. Someone thought they saw a man with a little girl at a gas station in Oakland. Officers rushed to check it out. False alarm. Another caller reported a brown sedan speeding out of the parking lot around the time of the abduction. Police searched for that car for weeks. They never found it. One tip after another. Each one raising hope, then crushing it. For Gordy, the case became personal in a way he couldn't quite explain. He'd worked plenty of cases involving kids, but something about Tara's photo got under his skin. He pinned it above his desk. That image of a smiling toddler in a Christmas sweater, taken just weeks before she disappeared. Every morning, before he did anything else, Gordy would look at that photo. And he'd make a silent promise. "I'm gonna find you." Days turned into weeks. The initial frenzy of the search began to slow. Officers got pulled back to other cases. The phones stopped ringing as often. The news moved on to other stories. And with each passing day, the terrible reality set in. This case was going cold. Elizabeth Burke made another public plea in March. By then, she looked hollowed out. The weight of not knowing was eating her alive. She stood in front of cameras, voice shaking. "Please," she begged. "If you have my daughter, just bring her back. No questions. No prosecution. Just bring her home." But no one called. No ransom demand ever came. No body was discovered. Tara had simply vanished into thin air. Steve Burke dealt with it differently. He withdrew from the media, poured himself into cooperating with police. He felt guilty too. He'd been there. He'd left the kids in the car. He carried that weight quietly, trying to hold his family together while falling apart inside. Their neighbors tied yellow ribbons around trees, held candlelight vigils, brought casseroles and sympathy, but none of it brought Tara home. Gordy refused to give up. When other detectives moved on, he kept digging. He called hospitals across California, asking if any unidentified toddlers had been brought in. He checked motel registries, looking for anything suspicious. He even drove to pawn shops, searching for children's items that might have been Tara's. Every night, he stayed late at the office. The phone on his desk was a dedicated tip line. It would ring at odd hours, jerking him awake if he dozed off in his chair. Sometimes it was a drunk with a garbled story. Sometimes it was someone claiming psychic visions. But occasionally there was a real lead. And every single one, no matter how far-fetched, Gordy followed up on. He kept Tara's photograph folded in his shirt pocket. It got crumpled from handling. He'd take it out during long drives, smooth the creases, study her face. "Where are you?" Spring arrived. The posters faded in the sun and rain. The edges curled and peeled away from telephone poles. What had once grabbed everyone's attention now blended into the background. Just another missing child poster. Just another tragedy. By summer, most people assumed the worst. Statistics aren't kind in these cases. The longer a child is missing, the less likely they are to be found alive. After 6 months, the odds drop to almost nothing. But Gordy held onto something. Call it faith. Call it stubbornness. Call it denial. He believed Tara was still out there. He had no evidence to support that belief. No logical reason to think she'd survived. But until someone showed him a body, he was going to act like she was alive and waiting to be found. Fall came. Halloween. Thanksgiving. Christmas approached. It had been almost a year since Tara disappeared. Almost a year of not knowing. Almost a year of Elizabeth waking up every morning and remembering all over again that her daughter was gone. The case wasn't officially closed, but it might as well have been. New crimes demanded attention. Resources were finite. Life moved on. Except for Gordy. He left Tara's case file open on his desk every single day. That photograph stayed pinned to the wall, gathering dust but never removed. Whenever someone suggested moving on, he'd shake his head. Someone out there knows something. We just have to find them. By December, 10 months had passed. 10 months of searching. 10 months of dead ends. 10 months of prayers and vigils and fading hope. And then, on the morning of December 18th, 1982, everything changed. A call came in from San Francisco. A young boy had walked into a police station at dawn, terrified and covered in bruises. He told officers he'd just escaped from a man who had been holding him captive in a van. And he said there was another child still inside. A little girl. When Gordy heard about it, his heart stopped. The description matched. The timeline matched. The age matched. It was her. It had to be. After 10 months of darkness, there was finally light. His name was Mac Lin. He was 11 years old, Vietnamese, one of thousands of refugee children who'd come to America searching for safety. And on that cold December morning, he became a hero. Mac walked into the San Francisco police station just after dawn. He was thin, almost skeletal. His clothes hung off his small frame, dirty and torn. Bruises covered his arms in various stages of healing, purple and yellow and green. The desk sergeant took one look at him and knew something was very wrong. "Are you okay, son?" the officer asked, kneeling down. Mac took a shaky breath. "I just escaped from a man," he said. "He keeps me in a van. There's another kid in there too." The officer's eyes widened. Within minutes, Mac was in an interview room with a blanket around his shoulders and hot chocolate in his hands. Detectives and social workers gathered around, gentle but urgent. They needed to know everything, and Mac told them. He'd been held captive for months by a man who called himself Tree Frog. That's what everyone called him. Tree Frog. His real name was Luis Johnson, but Mac didn't know that yet. Tree Frog was in his 30s, heavyset, unkempt hair, scraggly beard. He lived in a van, an old gray Dodge Cargo van from the late 70s with windows covered in cardboard and blankets. Mac had met Tree Frog in the summer. He'd been alone at a bus stop, a kid with a troubled home life and nowhere to go. Tree Frog approached him, friendly and warm, offered him $20 to help watch a little kid. Mac thought, why not? He needed money. He needed a safe place for the night. But once he got in that van, Tree Frog wouldn't let him leave. For months, Mac lived in that van. It smelled like engine oil and rot. The floor was covered in garbage, old food wrappers, dirty clothes. There was a thin mattress in the back where they slept. Tree Frog moved the van constantly, parking in different spots around San Francisco. Industrial areas, quiet streets, places where people wouldn't look twice at an old van. If Mac tried to talk too much or disobeyed, Tree Frog would hurt him. The bruises covering Mac's arms and back when police found him told that story without words. But the worst part, the part that made Mac's voice shake as he spoke, was the other child. "There's a little kid in the van," Mac said. "Really small, like toddler age. Tree Frog keeps them locked up all the time." The detectives leaned forward. "Do you know if the child is a boy or a girl?" Mac frowned. "At first, I thought it was a boy. Tree Frog cut the kid's hair really short and dressed them in boys' clothes. But I heard him slip once. He called the kid her. So, I think it's a girl. A little girl." The room went silent. One of the detectives spoke carefully. "Do you remember the child's name?" Mac thought hard. Tree Frog called her some fake name most of the time. But once, when he was mad, he yelled something that sounded like Tara or Sarah, something with a T. That's when someone pulled out the missing persons database. That's when they saw the photo of Tara Burke from Concord. 2 years old, blonde hair, abducted 10 months ago. The pieces clicked into place. The San Francisco police moved fast. They asked Mac to describe the van in detail. Gray Dodge, dented on the left side, California plates, windows covered. Mac even remembered there was a small vent on the roof. That's how he'd escaped. He'd waited until Tree Frog and his teenage helper left the van, then squeezed through that vent and ran. Within hours, they had a name. Luis Tree Frog Johnson, 33 years old, known to police. Priors for indecent exposure and drug possession. Last known to be living out of his vehicle somewhere in San Francisco. They also identified the teenage helper. Alex Cabarga, 17 years old. He'd been with Johnson for years, essentially groomed and controlled since childhood. Now they just had to find that van. Officers fanned out across the city, checking industrial areas where transients often parked. Mac had mentioned the area near Army Street, down by the warehouses. That's where they focused. It was late at night, almost midnight on December 18th, when they found it. An old gray Dodge van, dented on the left side, parked in a gravel lot behind a warehouse. The windows were covered just like Mac described. Everything was dark and still. Officers surrounded the van quietly, guns drawn. A lieutenant called out through a bullhorn. "This is the police. Come out with your hands up." Nothing. They called again. Silence. Given the potential danger to the child inside, they didn't wait. An officer pried open the side door with a crowbar. It slid open with a screech. The smell hit them first. Urine, sweat, rotting food. It was suffocating. Officers shined flashlights inside, and that's when they saw her. A small figure huddled in the back, wrapped in a filthy blanket. "Child here," one officer shouted. They climbed inside carefully, not knowing if the kidnappers were hiding somewhere in that cramped space. But it was just her. The little girl, alone on a dirty mattress, blinking at the sudden light. An officer approached slowly. "Honey, you're safe now," he said softly, scooping her up. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just pressed her face against his shoulder, trembling. Outside, other officers found Johnson and Kabarga sleeping in a car about 50 yards away. They were arrested without a fight. Johnson demanded a lawyer immediately. Kabarga broke down in tears, saying, "It was him. He made me do everything." The little girl was taken to a children's shelter. Paramedics checked her over. She was malnourished, dehydrated, covered in bruises. But she was alive. And when they compared her fingerprints to prints taken from Tara Burke's bedroom in Concord, they got a match. It was her. After 10 months, Tara Burke had been found. When Gordy got the call, he closed his eyes and let out a breath he'd been holding for almost a year. He grabbed his coat, grabbed that photograph, and drove to San Francisco in the middle of the night. By the time he arrived at the children's shelter, it was almost dawn. Tara was in a small playroom, wrapped in a clean blanket, holding a teddy bear the staff had given her. She hadn't spoken a word since being rescued. Gordy walked in slowly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up at him with wide, wary eyes. Her hair had been chopped short and dyed brown. Her cheeks were sunken. She looked so much older than 2, like she'd aged years in those 10 months. Gordy knelt down a few feet away. He pulled out that photograph from his pocket, the one he'd carried for so long, and placed it on the table in front of her. It was the Christmas photo. Tara with long blonde hair, smiling in her red sweater. She stared at it for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and touched the picture with one tiny finger. "That's me," she whispered. Her voice was raspy from months of not speaking. Then, even quieter, she added, "I want my long hair back." Gordy had to swallow the lump in his throat. He reached out and gently covered her hand with his. "We'll get you your long hair back," he promised. "You're safe now, Tara. You're safe." It was the kind of moment that changes you. The kind you never forget. After 10 months, she was coming home. Luis Tree Frog Johnson and Alex Kabarga were arrested that night. By morning, prosecutors had compiled an extensive list of charges, over 100 counts in total. The charges included kidnapping, false imprisonment, assault, and multiple counts related to the exploitation and abuse of minors. As investigators processed the van over the following days, the evidence they collected was staggering. Polaroid cameras, hundreds of instant photographs, rolls of undeveloped film, children's clothing that clearly didn't belong to Johnson or Kabarga, rope, duct tape, and perhaps most chilling, a notebook filled with Johnson's rambling writings about creating a family of his own, about children who would never leave him. From Mac's testimony and the physical evidence, investigators pieced together what had happened inside that van. On February 6, 1982, Johnson had watched the Burke family pull into that parking lot in Concord. He'd waited for his moment. When both parents went inside the store, he approached the van with a simple lie. "Your mom wants you inside." Jeremy, trusting and wanting to help, unlocked the door. Johnson grabbed Tara and ran. He drove straight to San Francisco that same day, probably taking back roads to avoid police roadblocks. Once there, he cut Tara's hair short and dyed it brown with cheap drugstore hair color. He dressed her in boys' clothing, even gave her a boy's name. He was trying to erase her identity, to make her disappear completely. For 10 months, Tara lived in that van. Johnson moved it constantly to avoid detection. One day they'd be parked in an alley in the Mission District, the next day under a freeway overpass, another day along a quiet residential street. The windows were always covered with cardboard and blankets. Nobody could see inside. Johnson enforced a grim routine. Irregular meals, often withheld as punishment. Bizarre rules enforced through intimidation. When Tara cried for her parents in those early days, Johnson would yell at her until she stopped. Over time, she learned not to speak at all. She became almost mute, likely out of fear and confusion. Mac's testimony revealed how Johnson controlled both children. He referred to himself as their father. He made Mac call him sir. He beat Mac with a rubber hose if the boy disobeyed or spoke out of turn. The bruises on Mac's body when he escaped told that story without words. In the summer, months into Tara's captivity, Johnson crossed paths with Mac. The boy was 11, spending time downtown, often unsupervised. Johnson lured him with the promise of $20 to help watch a little kid. Once Mac stepped into that van, Johnson made sure he never left. He confiscated Mac's clothing and identification, threatened him if he tried to run. For months, the two children were trapped together in that cramped space. Mac did his best to protect Tara when he could. He'd sneak her extra food, whisper to her that everything would be okay. But he was just a kid himself, and Johnson's control was absolute. The breaking point came in December. Johnson and Kabarga left the van one night, probably to get food. Mac saw his chance. There was a small vent in the roof of the van. He'd been too scared to try it before, but now, with Tara sleeping and the men gone, he made his move. He squeezed through that vent and ran. He ran until he found a phone, called the police, and led them back to save Tara. The trial began in the spring of 1983. Johnson faced over 100 charges. The evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors introduced the photographs seized from the van, each carefully catalogued. Many were shown to the jury in closed session due to their sensitive nature. They played videotape excerpts with the courtroom cleared of spectators. Mac bravely took the stand and recounted what he and Tara had endured. Doctors testified about the children's injuries and the medical evidence of prolonged mistreatment. Psychologists explained the psychological trauma, the long-term effects of captivity on such young victims. The jury listened with visible anguish. Some jurors openly wiped tears away. Others looked at Johnson with undisguised outrage. The trial revealed details that made even seasoned investigators struggle. What those children experienced in that van went beyond simple captivity. Johnson's notebook entries showed a disturbing fantasy. He believed he was creating his own family, children who would never leave him. Investigators interpreted this to mean he intended to keep Tara indefinitely, raising her under his complete control. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days. Johnson was convicted on all counts. At sentencing, the judge didn't hold back. "In my 30 years on the bench," he said, "I have never encountered crimes of this magnitude against children so young and so innocent. The depravity demonstrated here demands the maximum response from this court." Johnson was sentenced to 527 years in state prison. The number was symbolic, ensuring he would never breathe free air again. He was transferred to Tehachapi State Prison to serve out his term. He would remain there until his death behind bars years later. Alex Kabarga's case was more complicated. He was 17 at the time of arrest, legally still a minor for part of the period when the crimes occurred. But the court elected to try him as an adult given the severity of the offenses and his active participation. Kabarga's defense painted a picture of a psychologically dominated teenager who had been groomed by Johnson from childhood. Court records showed that Johnson had controlled Alex since he was around 9 years old. The defense argued that his capacity to distinguish right from wrong had been severely compromised by years of manipulation and control. The prosecution acknowledged Alex's tragic background but held him accountable nonetheless. They pointed out that Alex had opportunities to seek help when Johnson was absent, yet he never did. Moreover, the evidence showed Alex didn't just obey orders, at times he actively participated. Acts that went beyond mere coerced compliance. The jury found Alex Kabarga guilty on multiple counts including kidnapping, conspiracy, and assault. In recognition of his youth and the fact that he too had been victimized by Johnson for years, the judge delivered a measured sentence. Alex was initially sentenced to 208 years in prison. On appeal, considering his status as a minor during many of the events and the extensive evidence of his own long-term victimization, his sentence was reduced to 25 years. With credit for time served and the potential for parole, Kabarga served roughly 12 years. He was released on parole in 1995. Upon release, he faded into obscurity, reportedly changing his name and attempting to rebuild his life far from the shadow of this case. For investigators and officers who worked the case, The verdicts brought legal closure but little peace. The details that emerged during trial left lasting marks on everyone involved. Many had nightmares about what they'd seen and heard. The van, the evidence, the thought of what a toddler had endured. Sergeant Gordy struggled with the transition from frantic search to somber aftermath. Finding her was supposed to be the end, he said in a later interview. But once we saw what she lived through, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival, barely. He'd gotten exactly what he'd prayed for. Tara alive and the men responsible behind bars. Yet the revelations of what she'd survived weighed heavily on him, dampening any sense of triumph. Still, there was solace in knowing that a dangerous predator would never hurt another child again. The community expressed relief that justice had been served. The Burkes, who had been absent from most of the trial to spare themselves and Tara the ordeal of hearing every detail, were deeply grateful to the police and prosecutors. A statement delivered on their behalf simply said, "Our baby is home, and these men can never hurt anyone again. We are thankful beyond words." Tara's recovery was delicate and long-term. In the immediate aftermath of her rescue, she spent months under the care of doctors, counselors, and compassionate specialists who worked with traumatized children. At just 3 years old, Tara had limited ability to articulate what had happened to her. Psychologists explained that her young mind had likely repressed much of the worst trauma. They advised her family not to press her to recall those 10 months. Instead, the focus was on making her feel safe, loved, and normal again. When she was well enough to return home, measures were taken to guard her privacy. The media, which had been relentless during the search and rescue, gradually backed off out of respect for her young age and what she'd endured. To ensure she could grow up without a public spotlight, Tara was enrolled in school under her mother's maiden name. Only a handful of school officials knew her true identity. To her classmates, she was just another student. In this way, Tara was able to reclaim the ordinary childhood experiences that had been stolen from her. Playing on swing sets, learning to write her name, making friends, all without the shadow of her notorious story hanging over her daily life. Life wasn't without challenges. The Burke family struggled in the aftermath. The intense pressure and emotional toll of those events lingered. The strain was immense. In time, Elizabeth and Steve separated and eventually divorced. The marriage couldn't survive the weight of what they'd been through. There were periods of upheaval, long silences at home, relationships strained beyond repair. But through it all, Tara showed a resilience that astonished everyone around her. With ongoing therapy sessions, funded in part by California's victim services programs, she gradually learned to trust adults again, to sleep through the night without terrors, to separate the memory of her captors from every unknown person she encountered. During these formative years, one constant presence remained in Tara's life: Dick Gordy. He didn't walk away when the case closed. Initially, he stayed in touch as the officer assigned to her case, visiting to check on her welfare as she healed. But very quickly, it became clear that Gordy cared for Tara well beyond any professional obligation. He often stopped by the Burke home just to say hello or bring small gifts: a teddy bear on her birthday, a box of her favorite cookies at Christmas. As she grew older, he'd drive her to doctor appointments if her parents were busy, or take her out for ice cream after a tough therapy session. What started as a police officer's duty blossomed into a genuine bond. Gordy had never had children of his own. He'd spent his career seeing the worst things that could happen to kids, and somewhere along the way he'd decided that was enough reason not to have any. But here was this little girl whom he'd helped bring back from darkness, and he felt responsible for ensuring she had the brightest future possible. After working juvenile division so long, I felt responsible for every kid in town, he admitted years later. I never wanted my own because of the horrors I'd seen. But Tara was different. She touched my heart in a way I can't explain. He became a sort of godfather to her. When Tara reached adolescence and faced new challenges, struggles with identity, occasional clashes with her family, the normal growing pains of any teenager compounded by her past trauma, Gordy was there. He arranged tutoring when her grades slipped. He was there to give advice about her first crush and her first heartbreak. If Tara felt overwhelmed or lost, She knew she could call Gordy or drop by the police station, and he would stop everything to talk with her. Education became a joint project for them. Tara had once been a little girl who could barely speak due to trauma, but she blossomed into a determined young woman with dreams. She confided to Gordy that she wanted to help children when she grew up, maybe as a teacher or a counselor. She was inspired by those who had helped her. Gordy encouraged that dream wholeheartedly. He helped her prepare for college entrance exams, worked through the paperwork of college applications with her, and when finances became an issue, he found a way. By the mid-90s, Tara achieved something extraordinary. She became the first member of her family to attend college. With Gordy's help and support from a few kind benefactors, local police officers and community members who quietly raised funds for her tuition, Tara was accepted to San Jose State University. She decided to study child development and psychology, a choice that surprised no one who knew her. She wanted to dedicate her life to ensuring that children have safe, healthy childhoods. Perhaps, in part, to fill the void of what she herself had lost and reclaimed. Moving away to college was a big step. She packed her belongings, including that old Christmas photo of herself that Gordy had once shown her in the shelter, and moved into a small dorm room on campus. It was typical college housing, cinder block walls, worn furniture, barely enough space to turn around. But Tara made it her own. She strung up fairy lights and tacked paper butterfly cutouts to the ceiling and walls. Butterflies had become her personal symbol. As she once explained to a friend, "Butterflies mean freedom to me. They're free and they don't live in cages." To anyone else, it was cute decoration. To Tara, it was a quiet celebration of her liberty and transformation. In college, Tara thrived. She was studious and kind, the type of person who would notice if a classmate was having a bad day and offer a word of comfort. Few of her college friends knew her history. She was simply Tara, the friendly girl in class who liked drawing butterfly sketches and always had soup packets in her dorm for anyone who was sick. She continued therapy periodically, understanding that healing isn't a straight line. Some days were harder than others, but she refused to let her past define her negatively. Instead, she drew strength from it. Occasionally, Tara spoke about her experience publicly, not for attention but to help others. She accepted invitations, with Gordy by her side, to share her story at conferences for missing children or with support groups for trauma survivors. In one recorded talk, her voice steady and clear, Tara said something profoundly insightful. "People always tell me to just try to forget what happened. But I don't believe in simply forgetting. Remembering it, acknowledging it, means I survived it. And every day I move forward, I'm proving that what happened to me is not all that I am." She consistently avoided labeling herself as a victim. She preferred the terms survivor or lucky. By reclaiming her narrative this way, Tara empowered not only herself but also others who heard her speak. Lieutenant Gordy, he'd been promoted by then, attended Tara's high school graduation and later her college graduation with the pride of any father. By the time she finished university, he was nearing retirement from the police department. But his commitment to Tara was lifelong. He'd spearheaded a scholarship through the Concord Police Association to help fund her education. He even convinced a local car dealership owner to donate a reliable used car so Tara could drive to school and work without relying on unreliable public transportation. His colleagues teased him often, saying he'd gone soft or that he was spoiling her, but it was always said with genuine admiration. They knew that through this one girl, Gordy had channeled the hopes and frustrations of years of police work. He couldn't save every child in danger, but Tara's case showed how far dedication could go. For Tara, Gordy was, in her own words, "my guardian angel." She wrote him letters from college even though they spoke on the phone weekly. In one letter during her freshman year, she expressed what she felt she could never quite say in person. "Dear Dick, I don't think I could ever repay you for what you've given me. Not just money for school, but love and support. You've given me a brand new life, and you are like a brand new dad. Thank you for never giving up on me. I love you, Tara." When Gordy received that letter, he had to wipe tears from his eyes before he could show his wife, Laura. Laura had welcomed Tara into their home many times over the years. On weekends or holidays, Gordy would pick up Tara from campus or from her mother's house and bring her to their place in Martinez. There, Tara found a version of family life that was warm and stable. She'd help Laura bake cookies in the kitchen, laughing as flour dusted the countertops. She'd play board games with Laura's young daughter, Brittany, who adored Tara like an older sister. Brittany had always wanted a sister, and as Tara once admitted shyly, "I always wanted a sister too." The two girls, one 19 and one 8, would giggle and whisper secrets during those visits, forging a sweet bond. Tara often slept in Brittany's room during overnight stays, the two of them chatting past bedtime. Eventually, Laura and Gordy prepared a spare room just for Tara so she'd always have her own space in their home. In many ways, she'd been adopted into their family by heart, if not by law. Over time, the physical reminders of what Tara had been through faded. The only marks anyone saw were ordinary childhood scrapes. A small scar on her arm from falling off a bicycle, a faint line on her knee from a playground accident. If you met Tara in the late 90s, you'd see a bright, earnest college student. You'd probably notice she kept her hair long again, flowing past her shoulders just like when she was little. You might notice she was especially kind to children, exceptionally patient with people, not quick to anger or judge. What you wouldn't see were any outward signs of the trauma she'd survived. Those wounds had been tended to with great care and had healed as much as humanly possible. Her medical records and court documents were sealed by court order to protect her privacy. To the outside world, she became just another success story of a young woman overcoming adversity. 15 years after her rescue, a reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle sat down to interview Tara for a follow-up story. By this time, she was about 18, finishing her first year of college, full of optimism for the future. In a photo taken for the article, she sits at a table with a gentle smile, helping a younger student with homework, perfectly capturing her nurturing spirit. She spoke respectfully and openly about Sergeant Gordy's role in her life. "He doesn't like the word dad," she said with a playful smile to the reporter. "But that's what he is to me." Gordy sat off to the side during that interview, undoubtedly bursting with pride but modest as always about his involvement. For Richard Dick Gordy, the case of Tara Burke never truly left him. Even as he moved through the ranks and eventually retired from the police force, he kept Tara's case file, its pages yellowed, edges worn from being handled so often, neatly in a drawer at home. And on the wall of his home office, he had that same cherished photograph of 2-year-old Tara in front of a Christmas tree, smiling in her little red sweater. He'd replaced the old creased copy with a fresh print, but it was the identical image that had fueled his determination all those nights. Sometimes Gordy would catch himself gazing at that photo, reflecting on the incredible journey that followed the moment it was taken. In interviews over the years, when asked about the case that had the happy ending, he often grew thoughtful and a bit emotional. "It's strange," he explained once. "When you're a cop, you expect closure to come from catching the bad guy. But real closure came when I saw her walk into a room again, alive and smiling. That's when I realized we hadn't just solved a case. We'd saved a life." Saving a life, he felt, was infinitely more meaningful than simply closing a file. True to his nature, Gordy rarely delved into the harrowing details in public. He didn't speak about what he saw in the van or the evidence that kept him awake at night for a long time. Those details, he said, belonged to another world, a dark world that he was happy to leave sealed away. What he focused on instead was the light that emerged from the darkness. The image of Tara as a vibrant young woman with her whole future ahead of her. One evening, after a charity banquet for a missing children's organization, Gordy was seen standing alone in the parking lot. In his hand, he held that small photograph of Tara from so long ago. A fellow officer who approached heard him speaking softly, almost to himself. "We found her," Gordy whispered, his voice filled with quiet wonder. "She made it." There was no fanfare in his tone, just deep contentment and faith vindicated. For Tara Burke, the child who vanished in terror and returned in triumph, and for the man who refused to stop looking for her, those simple words encompassed a world of meaning. Tara Burke is in her mid-40s now. She's had decades to process what happened, to work through the trauma, to decide who she wants to be beyond that February day in 1982. We don't know much about her current life, and honestly, that's exactly how it should be. She earned her privacy. She earned the right to move forward without being forever defined as the girl who went missing. She earned the chance to be just Tara, not a headline, not a case file, not a symbol. But her story matters. It matters not just as a cautionary tale, though it certainly is that. Not just as an example of police work and persistence, though it's that too. It matters because it's profoundly, deeply human. It's about a family torn apart and imperfectly put back together. It's about a little girl who survived when the odds said she shouldn't. It's about an 11-year-old boy who found courage in the darkest moment and chose to run toward help instead of away from everything. It's about a detective who refused to give up, who carried a photograph in his pocket for 10 months and never stopped believing. The Tara Burke case happened in 1982, in that window before many of the systems we have today existed. Before Amber Alerts could notify an entire region within minutes of a child going missing. Before faces of missing children appeared on milk cartons in grocery stores across America. Before shows like America's Most Wanted brought fugitives into living rooms nationwide. Before the internet made information spread at lightning speed. In some ways, cases like Tara's helped create those systems. They showed law enforcement and communities how critical those first hours are when a child disappears. How important coordination between different police jurisdictions can be. How much can be lost when we don't act fast enough or share information quickly enough. Today, when a child is reported missing, the response is immediate and coordinated on a scale that didn't exist in 1982. Amber Alerts go out to millions of phones simultaneously. Photos spread across social media in seconds. Highway signs flash descriptions. The entire community mobilizes. That infrastructure exists partly because of cases like this one, cases that showed us what happens when we don't have those systems in place. But here's what makes Tara's story different from so many others. She survived. Against impossible odds, after 10 months in conditions no child should ever endure, she came home. And not only did she survive, she thrived. She went to college, built a career helping children, created a life worth living, became someone who could stand in front of audiences and say, "What happened to me is not all that I am." That doesn't erase what happened to her. Trauma doesn't work that way. The scars are still there, even if you can't see them. The therapy continues. The hard days still come. But Tara proved that those scars don't have to be the end of the story. They can be part of a larger narrative about resilience, about healing, about refusing to let darkness win. Mac Lynn, the boy who saved her, deserves to be remembered in this story too. We don't know much about what happened to him after his brave escape. He was a refugee child who'd already faced so much before being taken by Johnson. What happened in that van added another layer of trauma to an already difficult young life. But his courage changed everything. His decision to squeeze through that vent, to run for help, to trust the police enough to lead them back to that van. It saved Tara's life. Without Mac's bravery, she almost certainly would never have been found. She'd have remained hidden in that van, her fate unknown to everyone who loved her. Mac Lynn is a hero in the truest sense of the word. And wherever he is today, he deserves to know that his courage mattered. That because of him, a little girl got to grow up, got to go to college, got to help other children, got to live. And then there's Dick Gordy, the detective who wouldn't give up, who carried Tara's photo in his pocket and promised her every day that he'd bring her home. Gordy showed us what it means to truly care about the people you serve, to see them not just as case numbers or statistics, but as human beings deserving of every effort, every hour, every ounce of determination you can give. He could have moved on after a few months. Everyone would have understood. The case was cold. The leads had dried up. There were other crimes demanding attention. But he didn't. He kept that file open, kept that photo on his wall, kept making calls and checking records and refusing to accept that Tara was lost forever. And when she was found, he didn't walk away. He became part of her healing, part of her future. He made sure she had opportunities that might have seemed impossible given how her life started. He helped her get to college, gave her a stable family environment, showed her that good people exist, that adults can be trusted, that the world isn't only darkness. Gordy retired from the police force years ago, but until his last day in that office, he kept that photograph of Tara on his wall. The one from Christmas, with her long blonde hair and bright smile, not as a reminder of the case, but as a reminder of what's possible when you refuse to quit. Luis Tree Frog Johnson died in prison, exactly where he belonged. He never walked free again, never had another chance to hurt a child. And while that doesn't undo what he did, it means his capacity for harm ended the day he was locked away. The parking lot where Tara was taken still exists in Concord. It's just another parking lot now, filled with people running errands, living their ordinary lives. Most of them probably don't know what happened there 43 years ago. The auto parts store might not even be the same business anymore. Life moves on. Places where tragedies occurred become just places again. And maybe that's okay. The world doesn't memorialize every moment of horror. We'd be paralyzed if it did. But we can remember. We can learn. We can appreciate the stories of survival that emerge even from the darkest cases. We can honor the people who refused to give up, who kept searching, who broke free, who helped others escape, who showed us that healing is possible, even when it's complicated and messy and incomplete. We can teach our children to be cautious without making them afraid of the world. We can build systems that respond faster and more effectively when the worst happens. We can support survivors and their families as they navigate the long, difficult road of recovery. Most importantly, we can remember that behind every case, every headline, every statistic, there are real people, survivors, families, communities, still living with the impact of these events. Their stories deserve to be told with respect, with accuracy, with compassion. Tara Burke survived. That sentence holds more weight than it might seem on the surface. She survived the abduction. She survived the captivity. She survived the trauma and the recovery and the burden of carrying a story she never asked to be part of. She survived to adulthood, to education, to whatever life she's built for herself beyond the public eye. And maybe that's the most important part of this story. Not the horror of what happened, but the simple fact that it didn't destroy her completely. That she's still here, still living, still moving forward, still helping others, still proving every day that survival is possible, that healing is real, that hope isn't foolish. That's not nothing. That's everything. Thank you for listening to Tara's story. If it moved you, please hit that like button and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Subscribe to Seek Stories for more true crime cases told with the depth, respect, and hope they deserve. Remember, these aren't just stories. They're lives, and every single one of them matters.